Alright YouTube, so we are back of course with some Final Fantasy VII and Remake content kind of going together for this video. And we have a very interesting theory, discussion, concept to talk about today. Now we were asking the question of whether or not Cloud's mom is real. You can interpret this question in two different ways. Is Claudia Strife the character even real? Does she exist at all? Or because at this point in the FF7 story, Cloud's memories aren't exactly accurate, maybe she does exist, but maybe what he's remembering isn't exactly real. Now, this topic actually stems from me wanting to make a different video. We've talked a few times about Cloud's father in kind of passing in other videos, never a dedicated video. So I kind of wanted to make a video about that, but as I started researching and looking up stuff, parents play a big part in the FF7 story. You learn a lot about other characters' parents. For example, Sephiroth, of course, Jenova being his quote-unquote mom, but also Hojo and Lucretia. You learn about Aerith's parents being Ifalna and Professor Gast. Even down to like smaller characters like Marlene, for example, you learn that Barrett is not actually her dad. And these are all pretty big moments in the FF7 story, and then you have Claudia Strife, who's relegated to a single scene that we see twice. It's a little bit extended when it comes to the calm flashback, but we first get it when Cloud goes to Aerith's house. She's relegated to one single scene, and she's not even really the motivation for Cloud wanting to get revenge on Sephiroth. It's more so the Nibelheim incident as a whole, than of course the death of Aerith. Now obviously the death of his mother would have impacted him to some degree, but I find it very weird that Claudia Strife's death, the mother of our main character, our protagonist, is relegated to one simple scene, and he never brings her up again. I think we talk more about Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge in the story dying, and Aerith dying more than his own mom. Now, those deaths are more recent in the story, and Cloud's mom died a couple years back, but you think that'd be the main motivator for him wanting to get revenge on Sephiroth? You think it's something he'd say to him pretty much every time they run into each other, I'm going to kill you because you killed my mom. But again, he doesn't. That was a pretty lengthy intro before we get into the meat of the video, but before we hop into it entirely, speaking of Cloud's dad earlier in the video, he actually does mention him one time in the game. During the calm flashback, he mentions that his dad died when he was young, and that's why his mom lives alone. I guess this one line never stuck with me. I thought they never mentioned Cloud's dad at all in the canon of FF7, and it's also been a long time since I played through FF7. It's been a good year or two. When it comes to the remake, I hope they go a little more into this instead of just a throwaway line of, my dad died when I was young. How did he die? What happened to him? Anyways, on to whether or not Claudia Strife is real. Now, I have several things that are in favor of this and a couple of things that are against it. We're going to look at it from both sides, of course. So first and foremost, when it comes to Cloud talking about his mom or remembering his mom, obviously at this point in the story, we know that Cloud's memory isn't exactly accurate. It isn't until the events of Mideel, whenever Cloud's catatonic and Tifa helps him get his memories back, that we learn the true past of Cloud. We learned stuff like Tifa and Cloud weren't actually childhood friends. They barely even knew each other. And of course we learned that the events of the Nibelheim incident weren't actually accurate. Most of what Cloud was recalling, even the persona that he takes on for the last couple of years, were all Zack's. If Cloud cannot remember relatively basic stuff like whether or not Tifa was actually his childhood friend, or even down to his own actual personality, who's to say he can recall the conversation he had with his mom accurately? Speaking of Cloud recalling that conversation, we actually don't even know if it is a memory, and here's why. The first time we see Cloud talking to Claudia, it's actually a dream that he's having at Aerith's house. The same thing can be said for the remake, of course. We go to Aerith's house, Cloud goes to sleep, has the memory or the flashback with his mother, and then he wakes up. I do think it's important to talk about this because through both iterations of the FF7 story, when we first see Cloud's mom, it's him dreaming about her as opposed to recalling a memory. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't normally dream about things I've actually done. Dreams are generally pretty abstract. They're usually situations and things that can't even possibly happen, or things that you want to happen, like possibly having a conversation with somebody you're not really close to, or have ever seen. And a couple of smaller things that I do think is worth talking about, they're not necessarily substantial, but they are very interesting to discuss, is the fact that, for one, Claudia looks exactly like Cloud. Pretty much Cloud with a ponytail. I mean, down to the facial structure, the face itself, the eyes, the hair color, even down to the hair going down the sides of his face. It's almost like he just thought up what he thinks his mom would look like. Pretty much a female version of him. Also think it's very interesting how much Claudia resembles Elmira, who of course Cloud just got done meeting right before the dream sequence. Hair pulled back, long sleeve shirt, white apron, doing house chores. Again, it's almost like Cloud conjures up a female version of himself, but then copy and paste exactly what Elmira looks like and what Elmira is doing. Also during this dream sequence, or flashback, whatever you want to call it, Claudia tells Cloud that he needs to find an older woman, and it just so happens that Aerith is older than Cloud. Now, we have no idea if at this point in the story Cloud even knows how old Aerith is, but they've been traveling for a little bit now, and there's a chance they've had casual conversations, and he would have found out her age. Now, as I said previously, I don't know how substantial these smaller details are, but when you kind of group them all together, it definitely leans more towards something that Cloud made up as opposed to being an actual memory. And why it's worth pointing out that this is a dream is because later on with the calm flashback, we get an extended version of this conversation with his mom, but we don't know, again, if he's recalling an actual conversation, a memory he has with his mom, or if he thinks that the dream that he had of Claudia was actually real. Something else worth pointing out from this flashback sequence is that Cloud is wearing a soldier first class outfit, which of course in the timeline he was not wearing this yet. We know from Crisis Core and from later parts of the original game's story that he's wearing just kind of a regular Shinra infantry outfit. And it's not until Zack and Cloud escape Hojo's captivity and being experimented on that Zack actually changes Cloud's outfit to the outfit that he wears now. And of course, all that takes place after the Nibelheim incident, after the supposed conversation he had with his mom. Now, we can simply chalk this up to Cloud just misremembering the situation. He does still think that he's a member of Soldier First Class, or an ex-member. But again, it's another thing worth pointing out. If Cloud cannot simply remember the clothes he was wearing in the moment, how can he remember the entire conversation? Speaking of Crisis Core, when it comes to Nibelheim, both just being there in general and during the Nibelheim incident, Zack cannot go into Cloud's house, which I find to be a bit interesting because based on the original game, he does go in there and see Cloud's mom dead. During the calm flashback segment, whenever Cloud is recalling the events of the Nibelheim incident, we see him go into the house to check on his mom. He walks out shaking his head to kind of insinuate that she has been killed. But we know because of the Midil segment, when Cloud gets his actual memories back, that didn't actually happen. He was the soldier laying on the ground, and Zack went in and checked on his mom. Or at least it's implied that Zack is the one that checked on Cloud's mom. Maybe he didn't, and that's why we don't do it in Crisis Core. But either way, when it came to the Nibelheim incident, Sephiroth going on a rampage, killing everybody in Nibelheim, and Cloud getting his actual memories back in Midil, why wasn't Claudia a part of those memories? Like, why wouldn't Cloud check on his mom? And when it came to the calm flashback and we get the extended version of the conversation between Cloud and his mom, it still skips around, as in Cloud not really remembering the entire conversation. So whenever he's trying to piece together his memories in Midil, why don't we get the full version of that conversation where it's not skipping around, where Cloud remembers everything? Again, it's almost like the conversation never happened, like it wasn't real, it was something he made up. So my whole thing here with everything we talked about so far is that why do they put such little emphasis on her as a character and her death having an impact on Cloud? It's almost like he just doesn't even care. He doesn't even check on her during the Nibelheim incident. That wasn't him. It's almost like she doesn't even exist or that she's not a real character, but we do have a couple pieces of evidence that prove that she actually is. In Crisis Core, Zack can see her, walk up to her and talk to her. Her name is Woman, but at this point back in like 2007, Claudia didn't have a canonical name anyways, but this proves that she does at least exist. Also, when it comes to Crisis Core, Cloud sends Zack a message about coming to his house and trying his mom's cooking, which kind of confirms her existence as well. And then you also have the fact that we know Cloud lived in Nibelheim as a kid. He was there as a child, which means somebody had to be taking care of him, presumably his mother. But to be honest, if you take Crisis Core out of the equation and look at the original game in a vacuum, there's not really proof that Claudia is even a real character at all. Though I do think she is. Obviously, they gave her a canonical name. I do think Claudia Strife existed. It's more so questioning whether or not the flashback sequence is even real at all. And why I mentioned taking Crisis Core out of the equation is because it adds some retcons. For starters, their characters are emailing and texting each other, but in the original game we were just calling each other on cell phones, but the original game is supposed to take place in the future after Crisis Core, so why wouldn't we also be texting and emailing each other? You also have Genesis being a big part of why Sephiroth freaks out in the reactor and goes on to destroy Nibelheim, but of course Genesis did not exist with the original game. He's never even talked about or mentioned. And there's other shit we could talk about, but that's not really the point of the video. What it comes down to is whether you do or don't like the stuff that Crisis Core adds to the story. Because if you take Crisis Core out of the equation, you could make the argument that Claudia Strife never even existed. But me personally, I can't just ignore Crisis Core, because whether I like it or not, it is canon to FF7, and I do like Crisis Core. I think it's a fantastic game. And with Crisis Core comes the proof that Claudia does exist as a character. I just question the conversation Cloud and Claudia have. Whether that was the exact conversation they actually had based on Cloud's faulty memories, or whether it happened at all because it was a dream sequence first. And the lack of Claudia throughout the rest of the game, and even when Cloud's regaining his memories, we don't see or hear about Claudia, which is kind of strange. But anyways, my dudes, that will pretty much wrap up the video. You might be able to tell that my voice is going out. I've been working on this video for about 6 hours. I've been recording and researching and editing for quite a long time now. This was a hell of a theory and discussion, man. It's something that I thought up, but when I researched it, I did see some people kind of talking about it on threads, like in comments on threads, about the possibility of her not being real. Maybe she was fabricated by the Genova cells. But I haven't seen anybody really break it down and discuss it to the degree that I did in this video, so I appreciate any support you guys can give on this video. Thumbs ups, subs, shares, whatever. Hell of a lot more effort went into this video than my usual ones. But either way, of course, I definitely want to pass it off to you guys. What are your thoughts on this discussion, theory, concept, whatever? Do you think Claudia Strife, for one, exists at all? Is she a real character or person? And besides that, do you think the conversation that Cloud has with her is accurate? Is he remembering that correctly? Either way, when it comes to the remake, I do hope they delve more into her as a character, whether she is real or not. give us more of Cloud's mom so that it's more impactful whenever she dies. But also, either way, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and what's up, did more Final Fantasy 7 and Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at dashingdavid. I'm on Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
That's the perfect type for you, I'd say.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect, we spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane, we in here like Low Gain, or leave it like Cobain.